I want to give you some insight on how to negotiate brand deals so that you don't get played and you get the real bag. Hey creatives, I'm Kosh, and this is the Creative Breakthrough. My mission is to completely eliminate the starving artist and give creatives the codes to build audiences, cash flow, and make a living doing what they love. Today, I want to talk about negotiating brand deals. This is a big one that I see across the board with my clients and what I hear about in culture. But a lot of this, at the end of the day, comes down to you having the self-confidence to implement boundaries and know what to say yes to and what to say no to. However, I have some tactics that I think can help you get the most for what you agree to. So if a brand reaches out to you about partnering, the first thing you want to do is see if you can find that brand's financial statement. A lot of times bigger brands, they're publicly traded, meaning they're listed on the stock market, and because of that, their financial statements have to be public information. So you can go online and search the brand's name and search financial report of that year, and it'll tell you how much they're spending in marketing. That's one way you can understand how much you should actually be charging for the content that you're creating for the brand. The second way you can do this, if a brand is not public, is you can go to the brand's website and you can get an understanding of like what their average product cost. And if they're a successful brand, meaning like you have a feeling that they make millions of dollars, then you can kind of gauge how many sales they do of these products or services, but usually products. Then when you're in discussions with them, you can ask them, what is your average order value? So the AOV is how much someone spends every time they make a purchase. Then you can ask them, how many orders do you do a month? And then you can multiply the average order value, which is the price that someone spends every time they buy, by the amount of orders that come in monthly for that brand. That'll give you an idea of how much monthly revenue they're making, how much monthly money is coming into that brand. Then once you understand what the monthly revenue is, you can multiply that by 12, and that'll give you their yearly revenue. It'll give you a good estimate of their yearly revenue. Then you should take 10% of what they make a year. That'll tell you pretty much what their marketing budget is. An easier way to do this would just be asking them up front. And sometimes brands will tell you just straight up, and sometimes they won't. If you speak the language, usually it won't be a problem, especially if you approach it in a friendly way or you use the right tone when you ask. So something like, what's your monthly revenue? And then maybe they'll just tell you, right? And if they don't tell you that, then you can ask about the average order value, or you can ask about how many units are being sold per month. So you would say, how many unit sales do you do a month on your most popular product? And then they'll tell you, and then you can say, well, what is your most popular product? And then you can multiply the cost of the most popular product by how many units, and that'll tell you in the month how much they're making. Then you can multiply that by 12, and that'll give you the yearly revenue. And then once again, you take 10% of the yearly revenue, and that'll give you an understanding of what their marketing budget is. Now, once you understand what their marketing budget is, you then want to say, well, maybe I can get 1% of this 10% because their marketing is not solely going to you. They're spending marketing on paid ads. They're spending marketing on other influencers. They're spending marketing on billboards, wherever they're spending money for marketing. If you can get 1% of the 10%, then that's really high, honestly, for most independent creatives or most independent influencers. And I'm using influencer as a general term. If you have a brand and another brand wants to do a paid post with you or a paid partnership, you're an influencer at that point, because these brands understand that the audience that you have is an audience that they want, and they're willing to pay you so that some of that audience comes over to their brand and purchases. The bigger your audience, the more money you can charge. But I'll give you a personal example. I did a brand partnership with a used camera reselling company. They do millions in revenue. This was one of their first times where they ventured into the paid influencer space. I was able to get this brand partnership because I had a relationship with someone who had a relationship with the marketing director at the company. I submitted my information via that person, which was kind of like a warm lead. They introduced me to this marketing director. They took a look at my brand and then they agreed that they wanted to work with me. That brand partnership was for 4 90-second videos, which I went above and beyond, and I think I did 3 to 5 minute videos. That's just because I wanted to over deliver, and they paid me $2,000 for those 4 videos that were ideally only supposed to be 90 seconds. And just so you understand, at the time of recording, I only had maybe 3,000 followers. For me, that was a really great price. I just want you to understand, you don't have to have a huge following, but you have to have a consistent brand with messaging that's consistent and uniform, and messaging just meaning like the things you talk about, the people you speak to, they need to be the same constantly. When I say the same, I don't mean like one day you're talking about weightlifting and then the next day you're talking about couches or cats. It's gonna be all kind of in one niche. The last piece of this is understanding how much time it takes you to create this content, which you should have like a gauge on at this point. If you're getting a brand deal, usually you have to be somewhat established and create a decent amount of content to get a brand deal in the first place. You need to understand how many hours it's gonna take you to create this content, and then ask for the amount proportionate to that. So what I like to tell creatives is you should be getting paid at least $50 to $100 an hour as an hourly rate at minimum. Earlier when I spoke about having the self-confidence and the boundaries, you have to be okay with walking away from things that don't serve you. If a brand's not willing to pay you enough, then a lot of times you shouldn't do it. But if the brand is big enough, so let's say you're working with a national brand or an international brand, sometimes it's okay to take a little bit less money up front because you know that you're gonna gain the attention behind working with a national or international brand. However, take this with a grain of salt and don't sell yourself short because of how big the brand is. It's gonna look good to other people, but at the end of the day, you have to make sure you're making a living for yourself, and this can be a big piece of the money that you make for your brand. After you've come to a conclusion on how much you believe you're worth and how much you think you should charge based on the company's financials, most times you shouldn't give them a straight price up front. And what I mean by this is, instead of saying, I charge $2,000 to do this, you would say, typically, brands of my size charge between $3,000 and $4,000. So you want to anchor who you're speaking to high, and that way, through negotiation, if it comes down, you still get your ideal number, what you wanted. Another great tip that I like to use in negotiation is asking brands, what is it costing them to not make this decision today? That might seem confusing, but I'm gonna break it down. Recently, I was negotiating a large deal with an ad agency. And as I was speaking to them, they offered me a deal for $10,000. And a lot of times that seems like a lot of money, and I agree that it can be a lot of money. But as I reviewed what was needed, I actually doubled the price and asked them for $20,000. We ended up settling somewhere in the middle, but if I would have just taken the $10,000, I would have severely undervalued myself because of the amount of work that was involved. Beyond just price negotiations, there's also term negotiations. And although I'm not an attorney and this is not legal advice, I want to share a few terms that you should look for in every contract. The first has to do with ownership. Most of the time, companies use a term called perpetuity. This is something that you want to pay attention to and make a decision on whether or not you want to give total ownership for the rest of time to a brand based on the content that you're creating. If you choose to do that, then you want to make sure that you're charging more upfront because they will have the option to do whatever they like with your content. This could mean that they could run ads using your content and they can make much more money than you made upfront. Now, this leads me to my next point, which is licensing. So you can also work out a deal with a brand around licensing. There's a few different types of licensing: exclusive, non-exclusive, and shared exclusivity. I'm not gonna cover those in depth because I'm not an attorney, but you should be aware that if you give a brand exclusivity, then they have the right for a certain amount of time to use the content in the terms that you agree on. Typically, you would license things for a number of years and the brand has the rights to use that content. But many times you can get a royalty from licensing the content to that brand. And speaking of royalties, if a brand wants to use your content as an ad, you should also try to negotiate a percentage from the revenue that the ads make the company. So if a brand runs your content as an ad and they make a certain amount of dollars off of running that ad, you should get a percentage of the money that they make from the new customers or the new products that they sell. Once again, this is not legal advice as I'm not an attorney. So you should consult a qualified entertainment attorney so you don't get played. So to recap, how to negotiate a brand deal: paying attention to the financials, understanding if they're a public company, looking at what their marketing budget is. If they're not a public company, understanding what the monthly revenue and the yearly revenue are. And then presenting a price that you believe you're worth. And finally, negotiating the rate that you want and approaching it in ways that anchor high, but also make the brand think about what your value is compared to other people in the space. If you would like to hire me to help you negotiate, you can click the link in the description and we can book a 15-minute consultation together. And I'll see you on the next one.